Hello everyone, it's great to be with you today as we continue our little mini-series looking at the life of Joseph. Now of course, as we all know, Joseph faced many different trials in his life, and these were battles which God used to transform Joseph, to turn him into the person that he needed him to be. Now Joseph faced these battles, and with God's help he won them. And winning these battles was key, I think, so that he could fulfill God's purpose and God's destiny for his life. And I think the first battle that we see Joseph facing is the battle over injustice. We see in Genesis 37, Joseph being treated terribly by his brothers. Now, regardless of his issues, his arrogance, his pride, his lack of wisdom, Joseph was still the victim of an injustice. He was rejected by his brothers. He was sold by them into slavery. What was Joseph's response? Well, I suspect many of us are thinking, well, why didn't he get even? He should have been plotting and planning, looking at ways that he might eventually be able to take revenge. But when Joseph's dreams had come true, when God had raised him up to a position of influence, raised him to a position of power and of privilege, he didn't use those things to get even. It would have been so easy for him, wouldn't it, to take revenge on his brothers. But God had so worked in Joseph's life by that point in time. He had been so transformed that he didn't look for revenge. Instead, he chose to forgive. It's a well-known thing that the biggest issues that are facing Christians are to do with money, sex, and power. But actually, I'd like to add two more things from my experience of Christian pastoral ministry. I think that disappointment and forgiveness, or more precisely, unforgiveness, the lack of forgiveness, are actually some of the biggest issues that face us as Christians today. And let me ask a question. What's our response to injustice? I can remember really well a lady in my previous church, me preaching on forgiveness one day, and her then coming up after the service and talking about a great injustice that had been done to her and her daughter. I remember an email that she sent me later that evening. She said, "I've been stuck in a sort of no man's land for the best part of a week, unable to sleep, feeling desperately tired and weepy. The hurt is still there, but thank you for reminding me of so many important truths about our great God, his unfailing love and acceptance of us just as we are, and the need to forgive. I really feel set free, and I thank God for speaking to me through you." And I remember the next morning, the first email that I received that morning was an email from this same lady, simply entitled Freedom, because God had set her free. You see, friends, the lack of forgiveness traps us in a prison, but it is forgiveness that sets us free. The pastor and philosopher Lewis Smead said this: "To forgive is to set a prisoner free, and to discover that the prisoner was you." You see, forgiveness is the key to winning the battle over injustice. Forgiveness restores relationships with God, with other people, and even with ourselves. And true freedom comes from choosing to forgive. And the second battle that Joseph faced and won was that Joseph won the battle for trust and dependence. In chapter 40, we find Joseph locked up in prison. He's sharing a cell with the cupbearer and the baker to Pharaoh. They both have dreams. Joseph interprets them. It's good news for the cupbearer. He's going to be restored to his position. But it's bad news for the baker. His head's going to be chopped off. But in chapter 40, verse 14, we find Joseph asking the cupbearer to remember him. In other words, to do something for him. When he's been raised back up, don't forget about me. Use your new influence to help me. Joseph is still trying to sort out his own problems, trying to find a human solution to the problem and the predicament that he finds himself in. Now we read that sometime later, Pharaoh has two dreams. They're well known: the 7 fat cows and the 7 thin cows, the 7 healthy grains of heads of corn and the 7 thin heads of corn. But what does this mean? And that's the question that Pharaoh's asking. That's what everybody's asking. And it's in that moment that the cupbearer says, "Oh, now I remember." You see, God in his timing was allowing this to happen. In chapter 41, verses 15 and 16, we find an amazing response from Joseph when he actually meets Pharaoh. He says to Pharaoh, "I cannot do it, but God will give the answer." I think this is an astonishing response because it's the response of humility. It's the response of someone who's learnt to trust and to depend on God, to trust that God alone will provide, that God is in control, and that God will give him what he needs. I can't help but think that if we're to become people who see God's destiny and purpose for our lives fulfilled, we need to be people who will win the battle for trust and dependence in God in our lives. The problem is that this is a battle, I think, that we constantly have to fight. God, it seems, is always trying to teach us this lesson, just at a constantly deeper and deeper and deeper level. So whatever you're facing today, may God bless you. May he continue to do his good work in you. And may you know him continuing to deepen your trust in him and your dependence upon him. So may God bless you today.